Welcome to the Deep Dives, where we take a massive stack of complex arguments, theological treatises, political assessments, historical critiques, and distill them down to the essential insights you need to understand the big, often unsettling picture.
Hello.
Today, we are wading into some fascinatingly dense material that connects spiritual discipline directly to political outcomes.
It really does.
And this is not just a standard political commentary. It's a profound theological and cultural critique, arguing that modern Western society, and specifically its large Christian population, is actively participating in its own decline.
Right, and they're doing it by embracing a spiritual mindset that, according to the author, encourages abandonment and non-action.
That's the perfect way to put it.
That's precisely the core tension we're tackling. Our source material today synthesizes political stagnation, cultural decay, and detailed assessments of contemporary failures in leadership. I mean, it critiques everyone from Donald Trump to Justin Trudeau.
A wide net.
A very wide net. And it links it all back to one central spiritual failing: an intense, often celebratory fixation on the end times, or the eschaton.
So the argument is that instead of seeing current global turmoil as a critical call for immediate corrective action,
A call for deeper stewardship.
right, instead of that, many Christians are interpreting these events as merely a sign of imminent reward.
That their train is about to arrive, as the source puts it.
The author essentially says, your spiritual focus is entirely misplaced. Stop passively watching the world burn as a sign of your reward and start working right now to ensure it doesn't burn on our watch.
It's a compelling high-stakes argument. They're making a case that this mindset, this longing for destruction, is a profound failure of Christian duty and stewardship.
And in doing so, it seems like it's fundamentally redefining what it means to become his agent on earth.
And what it means to participate in what the author calls the sanctification of creation.
So our mission today is pretty comprehensive. We're going to unpack the specific, detailed theological claims that reject this end times fixation and rapture theology.
We'll also explore this really expansive definition of Christian duty not just to your immediate family, but to your ancestors and to future generations.
A duty rooted in the very fabric of shared lineage.
And finally, we will dive into the highly detailed and sometimes scathing political assessment of contemporary failures in the U.S., Canada, and Europe.
And the goal is to show how political decay is merely the visible manifestation of this underlying spiritual negligence.
It is a demanding synthesis. This author views the political failures and the theological failures as fundamentally inseparable. They're two sides of the same coin.
Manifestations of either discipline duty or catastrophic negligence.
Exactly. And they ask you, the listener, to confront this possibility that the end may not be fate, but rather a direct consequence of current Christian inaction.
Okay, let's unpack this core argument right away. We need to begin at the foundation. Why is longing for the end fundamentally unchristian, according to this deep analysis? So where do we start with this theological critique?
We have to start with the sheer scope of this expectation in the modern world. I mean, the source notes that there are seemingly innumerable Christians across so many denominations who fully expect and anticipate the eventual end of the world.
And this isn't just one niche group.
Not at all. While this expectation is often codified in specific doctrinal traditions, like, dispensationalism,
Which is the system that organizes history into distinct era or dispensations,
Right.
often featuring a pre-tribulation rapture.
Precisely. But the author points out that this enthusiasm isn't exclusive to them.
Okay, so even those in, say, apostolic Christian traditions, whose churches often reject the specifics of modern rapture theology, they might still hold this imminent expectation.
They do, and often with a certain sense of excitement or a kind of fatalism. It's become an underlying cultural assumption of Christianity today, not just a specific doctrine.
Yeah. It's just in the water.
It is. And the source argues that this fixation, this looking toward the horizon for a dramatic exit, is fundamentally a betrayal of Christ's presence right now.
A betrayal. That's a strong word.
It is. The idea is that to obsess over the physical, visible return of Christ suggests a failure to recognize the multiple ways he is already present in the world.
We need to nail down these forms of presence because this seems like a crucial theological anchor for the author's critique.
It's the absolute anchor.
So what are the three crucial forms of Christ's current presence that this end times focus tends to obscure or even deny?
Okay, so first, his presence is within the Christian believer through the Holy Spirit. The believer is indwelt by the divine. That's number one.
The internal presence.
Right. Second, he is present in the Eucharist, or Holy Communion, which is the source of life and sanctification for many, many traditions.
The sacramental presence.
The sacramental, yes. And third, he is present symbolically within everything he has created. It all stands as a testament to his handiwork. Creation itself is a constant physical reminder of the divine agent.
Wow. That is a profound distinction.
Mm-hmm.
The author seems to be suggesting that if you are constantly focused on the future arrival of the physical body,
Mm-hmm.
you are discounting the power of the current spiritual, sacramental, and physical reality of Christ's presence.
You're devaluing it.
So the act of demanding Christ's return in the flesh to be in his presence is, ironically, a subtle denial of the efficacy of the cross itself.
That is the author's claim, which they call the salvific denial. To require the second coming to satisfy your need for his presence implies a deep skepticism about his completed salvific work on the cross.
And his ongoing work as our high intercessor.
Exactly. I mean, if Christ has won, and if the Holy Spirit is here, and if the Eucharist truly is his body, then focusing solely on the future physical return implies the present state is insufficient.
Or somehow less holy, a kind of spiritual impatience.
Yes, that's a great way to put it, spiritual impatience. And this impatient, future-focused lens immediately leads to a perverse incentive structure when you're looking at current events.
Right. The source notes that for those longing for the eschaton, wars and rumors thereof aren't lamented with genuine sorrow.
Not at all. They're often celebrated as concrete, verifiable signs that their train is arriving soon.
This is where the critique moves from, theological theory to something like practical immorality.
It absolutely does. Horrible global events, though you might recognize them intellectually as tragedies, they get framed primarily as signs to celebrate because they confirm a timeline.
Rather than as signals demanding immediate Christian repentance, self-correction, and decisive action to alleviate suffering.
They become data points for a prophecy chart, not a call to labor.
And that changes everything. I mean, if the world's ending soon, why would you bother building institutions that last for centuries?
Why would you?
Why invest energy in fixing political systems or long-term cultural projects if they are all destined for immediate incineration?
It fosters this powerful spiritual complacency where you only focus on saving your own soul and you forget the world Christ actually created and called good.
It's a retreat into the self.
Exactly. It makes the great drama of history an almost personalized event, a validation of the believer's timeline, rather than a universal tragedy that calls for immediate, difficult, and laborious stewardship. This worldview justifies a failure to work.
So since this theological expectation of a sudden evacuation is so central, the source really has to reject rapture theology itself.
It does. It has to. And it grounds salvation not in an escape, but in perseverance.
Okay, so how does it build that argument?
The author firmly anchors the definition of salvation in Scripture, specifically citing Matthew 24.13. But he that shall endure unto the end, the same shall be saved.
Endure unto the end, not escape before the end.
Precisely. This means salvation requires the perseverance of both faith and consistent works of sanctification. The source argues that God deliberately obscured the timing of the end, precisely so humanity would be forced to persist.
To endure hardship, to overcome challenges.
And in doing so, accrue merit through that labor.
So the uncertainty is the point. It's the spiritual crucible.
It is. If we knew the exact date of the exit ramp, we'd all just stop working the day before.
Yeah.
The system is designed to reward sustained, unblinking effort over time.
The moment the incentive to endure hardship and maintain civilization vanishes, the whole spiritual project it ends.
It collapses. Furthermore, the source raises a very stark, very challenging historical precedent against this whole idea of a mass escape.
And that precedent would be the fate of the martyrs.
The martyrs, and even the Theotokos, the mother of God.
Right.
Yes. The author asks you, the reader, to consider the historical facts. The God who permitted millions of Christian martyrs under pagan Rome, under Islamic rule, under Marxist regimes to die, often in prolonged and torturous ways,
is simply unlikely to spare his followers at the 11th hour via sudden, magical disappearance.
It's a powerful and historically grounding challenge to the comfort of the doctrine. I mean, if the Mother of God, the Theotokos, died and countless martyrs died, why would you, a contemporary Christian, expect a special, painless exemption from the end of the age?
It's a great question.
And the source drives that point home by noting the only two figures in history who have not seen death, the prophets Enoch and Elijah,
are foretold to be killed during the events of St. John's Apocalypse.
Right, so the natural shared human fate is death and suffering. even for the most righteous among us. The rapture is thus seen as a denial of that shared experience.
And a rejection of the spiritual purpose of suffering itself.
Yes. The author also applies a pretty strong historical test to the doctrine itself, citing its relatively late arrival in Christian history.
This is the late arrival of the doctrine argument.
It is. The source finds it highly suspicious and frankly unlikely that such an essential Christian doctrine, one that's central to the final chapter of salvation history, could remain almost entirely obscured for 18 centuries.
It just doesn't show up in a major way until the 1800s.
Exactly. It was only popularized in the 1800s by the English preacher John Darby.
And then the institutionalization of that idea in the United States really cemented its acceptance.
Correct. Its mass adoption in America came largely through the publishing of the Scofield Reference Bible at the start of the 20th century. For the author, this raises serious questions about its necessity for salvation.
The question being, if a doctrine is truly essential,
how could the Church, supposedly guided by the Holy Spirit for centuries, miss it entirely until a specific 19th century revivalist formulated it?
that historical lag, it suggests to the author that it's a human innovation.
Born of a desire to escape suffering, rather than a timeless divine truth. That's the core of the critique.
So if we accept the source's conclusion that the end is not imminent and we shouldn't be expecting a magical escape hatch, then the spiritual imperative shifts entirely.
Completely, from anticipation to action.
Which leads us directly into this next section, where the author dramatically expands the concept of duty far beyond just personal salvation.
Right, because the author argues that this end times fixation, it fosters the mindset of the atomized individual.
The atomized individual, let's break that down.
The believer's outlook just narrows severely. It prioritizes immediate, isolated concerns, making sure I am saved, ensuring the immediate care of my nuclear family.
And this happens at the expense of a Christian's broader commitments.
To the public square, to the long arc of history, to civilization itself.
So you stop worrying about the state of public schools, or the quality of shared culture, or the maintenance of common institutions.
And you focus entirely on your own private spiritual fortress. It's an intellectual and a civic retreat.
And the author counters this retreat by insisting that Christians are fundamentally not atomized individuals.
Not at all. We are, in a profound spiritual sense, the living embodiment of the Church, containing within us the lives of countless past and future generations.
So our responsibility is historical.
It has to be. Our duty extends both backwards to our ancestors and forwards to our descendants.
Okay, let's elaborate on this duty to the past, because the source introduces a complex concept here. Supererogatory honor.
Mm-hmm.
It goes far beyond simply honoring your immediate mother and father.
Indeed. The traditional duty to honor our parents is extrapolated to a duty to all our ancestors. This is that supererogatory honor. The author argues we owe this debt because we are literally the product of their civilization.
Of their national choices, their faith, their struggles.
Everything. Our lives reflect the quality of who they were, and every success we have is built on the foundation they laid for us.
That reframes personal morality as a public historical act.
It does, and the author makes a very strong, almost confronting claim here.
Which is?
Sin against the self is sin against those who came before.
Wow.
Yeah. If you waste your talents, or you allow your health to decay, or you fail in basic moral obligations, you are not just failing yourself. You are reflecting poorly on the legacy your ancestors built.
It's like you're squandering their investment.
Exactly. The author suggests your ancestors are spiritually alive in Christ to bear witness to your deficiencies, and your failure dishonors their long efforts to build a stable world.
So, if they labored to build a civilization, and we fail to maintain it through our own negligence or vice, we're basically spitting on their sacrifice.
That's the argument. It creates a powerful historical accountability for your every action. Your life is not entirely your own.
And the expectation works in the other direction just as powerfully.
It does. We owe it to future generations to ensure the world we leave them is demonstrably better than what we inherited. Stewardship is redefined here as a civilizational project.
A project that spans millennia, not just a personal one that ends when you die.
Precisely.
Now, this concept of duty to future generations is made deeply personal and, in the source's view, almost genetic.
It is, especially when the author discusses shared lineage among Europeans.
Okay, this is a very specific argument. Let's get into it.
The sources introduced a a very specific, almost anthropological argument here. They claim that genealogical studies suggest that Europeans genetically share between 2 to 12 common ancestors.
Regardless of current ethnicity or nation.
Regardless, that is asserting a very close and pervasive genetic relationship across the entire continent, from Spain to Russia, and then across the Atlantic to North America.
And the author uses this closeness to derive a moral imperative.
A profound one. This relationship implies a direct, non-abstract duty to invest in the future of one's people, and that people is defined by shared race, culture, and faith to ensure perpetuation.
Okay, now wait. Applying a moral imperative and defining duty based on genetic lineage that is inherently problematic in a modern context. How does the author handle the potential cultural and ethical pitfalls of defining duty based on shared DNA?
That's a critical question, and you're right to ask it. The source doesn't shy away from the term race, but it frames this duty not as an exercise in exclusion, but as an act of fundamental responsibility toward genuine flesh and blood relatives. And this is done, in the author's view, in accordance with what God has ordained through creation and history. The argument is that you are naturally motivated to care for your immediate family. This insight simply expands the definition of that family.
So the motive isn't abstract altruism or some vague humanitarianism.
No.
It is concrete investment in one's actual kin, elevated to a matter of faith and stewardship.
Exactly. This reinforces the idea that duty has to be concrete and communal. It has to be focused on perpetuation and continuity.
Which means the failure to maintain a culture that honors the past and safeguards the future is framed as a direct moral abandonment.
An abandonment of millions of your biological and spiritual relatives.
This heightened sense of duty and connection, it leads us to the core concept of stewardship and the ultimate rejection of this spiritual mindset of abandonment.
It has to, because what is the fundamental danger of assuming the end is imminent?
It leads inexorably to the abandonment of creation.
Exactly. If you believe the world is about to be destroyed, there is little incentive to work, to maintain, or to build new things. These Christians effectively surrender the world to its preordained fate.
Deeming creation lost and spiritually irredeemable in its current state.
And the source argues that this fundamentally misunderstands the role of the Christian agent on earth.
Which is to work and transform.
Yes, Christians are meant to be God's agents on earth, taking what he provides, creation itself, the raw materials, and offering it back to him, intermingled with our works of love.
So God isn't lacking anything.
Of course not, but he desires the labor of his people.
Let's clarify this relationship between labor and love. How does our work transform creation and become an offering?
The author suggests that when our talents are used to craft, paint, or carve, say, a beautiful sculpture or a piece of architecture in remembrance of Christ, the resulting item becomes sanctified.
So the material object, which was just raw matter,
is transformed into a physical expression of love by the labor that was infused into it.
The object becomes a physical expression of love, and then its subsequent appreciation by others is another way to express love for God. It creates a spiritual feedback loop.
That is the essence of true labor in this framework. Pure love that transforms creation itself, making the world more beautiful and therefore more God-reflecting. The core message is that love is demanding. Love is laborious.
And if you abandon labor and work, you abandon this fundamental duty to God, which is why the source explicitly connects the end times fixation to a dangerous ancient heresy.
They argue that expecting destruction and refusing to labor for stewardship is, in essence, falling for the Gnostic lie.
Gnosticism, okay, for our listeners, that's historically a dualistic view, believing that spirit is good, but the material world creation is inherently flawed, evil, or fundamentally alienated from God.
Right. So if Gnosticism says the material world must be escaped,
the modern end times fixation mirrors this by saying the material world must be abandoned and ultimately destroyed if we are to obtain salvation.
Exactly. The source issues a staggering theological condemnation. The fixation on escape and destruction is a modernized Gnostic impulse. It rejects the goodness of creation
and the need for us to participate actively in its maintenance and its sanctification.
The body, the nation, the culture, the physical world, they all must be maintained because they are God's handiwork, not abandoned because they're merely a disposable vessel awaiting incineration.
That is a powerful theological bridge. The author has established that political decay isn't just bad policy, it's the inevitable result of widespread spiritual negligence.
It's the fruit of a bad tree.
So if Christians are neglecting their fundamental stewardship duties, Where does that negligence manifest most clearly in the political decay we see today?
Which the source analyzes with extreme precision and quite a bit of frustration.
So let's get into it. The author, who's clearly writing from a, let's say, a traditionally conservative or right-leaning perspective, applies this framework of duty and potential wasted mandate specifically to the American political situation, focusing heavily on Donald Trump.
He does. The author expresses initial high hopes for a second Trump presidency, viewing him as a disruptive force, but then quickly pivots.
And ultimately views him as what?
As ultimately unreliable and controlled.
This is a complex position for a right-leaning critique. It's not a total rejection, but it's a deep skepticism about his ability to fulfill the necessary mandate.
It is. And the source cites specific, powerful influences that they believe control him.
Okay, let's be clear about what the source says here.
Yes. The text is explicit in naming these influences. Either Zionist Jewish interests or the Silicon Valley tech elite. The author believes Trump is beholden to powers above himself.
Meaning his decisions are often compromised by external agendas that contradict the needs of the nation or the people who voted for him.
That's the claim.
Okay, we need to unpack the source's critique of Trump's stance on immigration, which is viewed as fatally flawed. Why?
Because it's rooted in economics, not culture or identity. Correct. The author views Trump's approach as that of a CEO of a firm, where policy is based purely on the need for short-term economic growth and maintaining GDP.
And this economic metric ignores the source's central definition of duty,
which is national identity, cultural integrity, and long-term perpetuation of one's people. In this analysis, even strict border control is useless if it's justified purely to staff up low-wage sectors rather than to preserve a civilization.
It's the why that matters, not just the what.
Precisely. And his personal consistency and loyalty are also questioned, described as a debilitating personal flaw.
How so?
The author views Trump as mercurial and notes that he will turn against his most loyal supporters for the slightest perceived offense. Disagreements, even just tactical ones, are immediately taken as personal attacks.
Which would make it incredibly difficult for principled, long-term allies to follow him or to hold him accountable to a consistent agenda.
It makes it impossible. This inconsistency is a major failure of executive discipline, according to the source.
The source also judges Trump heavily by the company he keeps, and specifically notes the controversy surrounding the Epstein affair.
Yes, the source notes the mismanagement of the Epstein affair as an unmitigated failure for the executive.
Why is that seen as such a failure?
Because the fact that Trump has allowed this association and its resultant scandal to be an albatross around his presidency's neck is seen as a sign of deep executive negligence and poor judgment.
Regardless of one's personal opinion on the specific actions of Epstein.
Right. It's the failure to clean house and distance himself that is judged so severely here.
So if Trump is granted a mandate the author says was earned through suffering and immense political persecution, and he is this inconsistent, what is the final verdict?
The conclusion is stark. The author believes Trump will undoubtedly enact some positive policies, but unless he is willing to go as far as is needful,
meaning enacting harsh, radical, and institutionally challenging policies,
then the rare mandate he earned will have been wasted. The source believes America requires a leader with that unique public validation to enact these necessary changes, and Trump's fundamental unreliability may preclude him from ever doing so.
It's a huge missed opportunity in this view.
Potentially catastrophic.
Okay, moving beyond the U.S., the source also provides a critique of political decline in Canada and Europe, illustrating that this political paralysis is a global phenomenon in the West.
It is. Let's start with Canada.
Okay.
The author noted some cautious optimism regarding Mark Carney potentially becoming Canada's prime minister, following what's called the disaster that was Justin Trudeau.
So Carney was hoped to be a figure who could transcend party division and enact necessary policies on demographics and immigration.
A non-traditional leader, yes. Someone who might be able to implement the tough, necessary changes the political system currently resists.
But that optimism is gone now.
It has evaporated, specifically due to a recent legislative change regarding naturalization. Canada amended its laws to permit descent-based citizenship.
Meaning, citizenship can now be passed down indefinitely through Canadian parents, even if those parents or children have never set foot in Canada.
Correct.
And why does the source view this specific policy change as such a critical failure?
The author argues this policy fundamentally hinders the national spirit. It makes the tough policies regarding demographics impossible. For the author, citizenship must be rooted in active participation, in residency, in loyalty to the shared physical space and culture.
So citizenship can be passed down passively without any connection to the nation itself.
It dilutes the concept of national loyalty and solidarity. It frustrates the national spirit you would need for any kind of political renewal.
And in Europe, the political right there seems calcified, caught between two distinct historical conflicts.
That's a perfect description. The European political right is described as being trapped in two limiting, outdated positions. On one hand, you have the early 2010s counter-jihad populism,
Which is focused almost exclusively on external cultural threat, often ignoring internal economic and institutional failures.
yes, and the other pole.
Is reviving Cold War-era jingoism against the Russian Federation.
Right. This obsession diverts energy and political capital away from the immediate domestic crises, particularly ongoing demographic and economic decline, by centering an external geopolitical foe.
And meanwhile, the underlying problem that author cares about most, what they call replacement migration, continues unabated.
It continues due to institutional resistance. The author notes that replacement migration continues, and while parties opposing it do exist, they are often compromised,
And they still face routine, legal, and extra-legal reprisal.
meaning they are shut down, deplatformed, or prosecuted outside of standard democratic practice. This widespread institutional resistance leads the author to a sobering, almost existential conclusion:
What's the conclusion?
that there seems to be no democratic solution left to the fundamental problems facing Europeans and North Americans.
That conclusion is chilling. If there's no democratic solution, it implies the system itself is structurally unsound.
Exactly. And this political critique is then tied back to a structural economic failure, the rise of financialization and the death of noblesse oblige.
Okay, let's explore that. The source draws a fascinating, complex contrast with the American Gilded Age industrialists.
It does. These figures, harsh as they often were in business, still maintained a paternalistic view of their employees and their communities.
They felt a sense of responsibility to those below them, a responsibility driven by a commonality of culture and faith.
Exactly. This period saw a return of the concept of noblesse oblige, the unspoken obligation of those with wealth and power to act responsibly and generously toward the less fortunate.
So they provided company housing, financed public works.
Promoted education and culture, and maintained a sense that, despite the class distinctions, the owner and the workers shared a common culture, a common history, a common faith.
So the economic relationship was still rooted in a shared social structure. What changed with the rise of finance capitalism?
According to the source, that commonality is gone. The concept of the corporate state has taken over. When a state is run like a corporation, which is what the author perceives Trump attempting to do,
Focused only on growth, metrics, and efficiency.
then all aspects of national life, from infrastructure to personal relationships, are financialized.
Let's pause and define financialization here clearly. What does it mean for something to be financialized?
It means transforming formerly social, cultural, or physical assets into instruments of profit or transactions. So instead of viewing a population as citizens with a shared destiny, they're viewed as consumers or labor inputs.
And instead of valuing a nation's culture for its intrinsic spiritual worth,
Its value is reduced to its contribution to the balance sheet. Everything becomes a liquid asset or a liability to be optimized.
and that destroys the possibility of paternal duty, of noblesse oblige, or any long-term stewardship.
Completely. And this cold, calculating political structure, it just breeds despair among the populace because the elites are so adept at preserving the status quo regardless of the electoral outcome.
The author observes that when powerful populist movements arise,
Adept elites are able to successfully harness and divert that energy. The populist rage is redirected towards minor symbolic victories, while the fundamental structures, financialization, demographic change, institutional control, remain completely untouched.
so the masses feel misled. Their vote and their voice are easily neutralized.
Which leads to the ultimate result, the crisis of faith in politics.
And what happens then?
Well, when every election is framed as an existential struggle, but the realization hits that politicians are ultimately not subjected to the will of their voters.
They're subjected to financial interests, institutional bureaucracies, media pressure.
It leads to deep despair and hopelessness.
Mm.
If politics, which is the primary mechanism of collective action and stewardship, can no longer provide solutions, the populace retreats. And that retreat loops right back to the original theological failure, despair itself.
That structural despair is the final enemy the author tackles. This last section is the author's final Powerful call to action.
It is. It's a crucial theological corrective against political nihilism.
So where do we begin?
Let's start with the central, terrifying consequence. The end times are framed not as some divine schedule or an inevitability, but as a direct result of Christian failure.
A failure.
The source states unequivocally that the end times represent a failing on the part of the Christian, commencing only as a result of negligence when true faith and true religion nears its end.
So our stewardship should be delaying the end, not celebrating its arrival.
Exactly. When Christ comes for the second time, it will be the result of Christian negligence. It will be because we allowed Satan to once again be in a position of near unopposed dominance over creation.
So the imperative is therefore clear. We must delay the end for as long as possible.
To bring more people to salvation and to prevent this dominance.
And to illustrate this moment of near extinction, when true faith is almost lost due to internal corruption, the source uses a powerful historical parallel.
The state of the Hebrew religion leading up to the incarnation.
This historical analysis is crucial. The source argues that under Roman rule, the Hebrew religion, the true religion established by God, was set to disappear. It had been thoroughly corrupted from multiple sides.
Okay, what were the specific forces corrupting it?
Well, you had the internal decay led by the Pharisees and Sadducees, who had turned faith into a rigid, self-serving legalism. Simultaneously, you had the Hellenizing laity, who were abandoning tradition for secular Greek philosophy and culture.
So pressure from inside and outside.
Exactly. And furthermore, the rising influence of the Talmud was seen as complicating and often corrupting the simple, divinely inspired law.
So it was a religion nearing extinction through internal decay, legalism, and external secular pressure.
The analogy is deliberate. The source states that the incarnation, in this analysis, saved the true faith of the Hebrews. Christ came and fulfilled both the moral law and the sanguinary laws.
The sacrificial, blood-based laws of the Levitical faith.
Yes, and this fulfillment fundamentally dissolved the old ontological barrier between cleric and laity and between Hebrew and Gentile.
Before Christ, the Hebrew people were often relying on a small, elite group of priests and prophets as gateways to God.
Correct, but by the New Testament era, even that elite priest caste was apostatizing with the aid of the Talmud. Christ came to save his Hebrew remnant, those who had remained faithful.
And it was through union with that remnant, the first followers, that his earthly kingdom, the church, was established.
This union is how salvation is accomplished. It's available even to those who formerly rejected Christ, provided they humble themselves and renounce their former identity.
So the message is that when faith reaches a point of near extinction due to human corruption and negligence, God acts.
But he acts by requiring radical, transformative action from his people.
Not by removing them from the field of battle.
It acts as the blueprint for required action today. Decay demands not escape, but deep, painful, and laborious intervention rooted in renewed spiritual purpose.
Given this mandate for action, the author provides a historical model of perseverance.
A refusal to abandon duty even in the face of inevitable defeat. The fall of Constantinople.
It is a profound, poignant example. The source recalls that as Constantinople fell to the Ottoman Turks, the divine liturgy being served at the Hagia Sophia continued until the very final moments of the city's end.
It's offered as the ultimate model of perseverance. A refusal to abandon duty, stewardship, or worship, even when the destruction you are trying to prevent is literally beating down your doors.
Duty is performed not for the guarantee of victory, but because it is right.
But the author also turns their critique inward, toward modern commentators who, while often correct in their political analysis of decline, inadvertently promote the same negligence they are describing.
By fostering a fatalism.
Exactly. They discuss figures like Common Filth and Devin Stack.
And the source acknowledges that the commentary from these and other analytical voices, it's often accurate and deeply insightful.
However,
The constant focus on the bleak prognosis, the relentless message that decline is irreversible, it nullifies any hope for the future. It renders lives meaningless in the present struggle.
if the analysis is correct but offers no mandate for action, the listener is left with despair.
And this is where the source issues its most powerful condemnation of the modern political mindset. The author, while admitting nihilistic determinism is an easy trap to fall into, rejects it as fundamentally erroneous and, critically, immoral.
How so?
Despair is identified as a product of decadency.
So despair is not a natural intellectual conclusion. It's a moral and spiritual failure.
It is framed as resignation to evil, used by lazy people to justify their lack of works before God and their nation. The author argues that despair and despondency are the very attitudes that fuel the destruction of our race, culture, faith.
And will ultimately lead to the end times.
Yes, when we mentally give up on God's ability to work through us, we are effectively manifesting Satan's will on earth by refusing our agency.
So political awareness and analysis of decline are necessary, but they must be used for a specific transformative purpose.
We must be aware of circumstances as they are, but that awareness is only valuable if it is used to uplift ourselves, both personally and collectively, in matters outside the immediate self.
It must be the fire that fuels the continuous labor of stewardship.
It has to be.
The final charge, then, is a direct inversion of the end times fixation that started our deep dive.
The charge is demanding. We should not seek or desire the end. We should actively pray for as much time as possible and conduct ourselves in conscious awareness that God's presence walks the earth with and through us.
That constant laborious awareness must be the fuel for continuous labor, perseverance, and civilizational stewardship.
That's the mandate.
What a profound and demanding conclusion. The author is calling for a massive shift in Christian thought, moving from passively watching for signs of the end to actively realizing one's role as a steward.
And laboring in love, fighting against societal decline, not just for personal salvation,
But for generations past and future.
The crucial takeaway here is the redefinition of Christian failure. The end times are not an inevitability ordained by fate. They are the result of human negligence and the triumph of despair over labor.
The author elevates the Christian's duty from a private relationship with God to a public civilizational mandate.
A mandate that demands the active sanctification of creation itself through dedicated work.
If the Christian is truly the living embodiment of the church, containing the past and the future, then the state of the world, the financialization, the political paralysis, the cultural abandonment, is a direct reflection of our works.
Or lack thereof.
It connects every failed political policy, every instance of institutional decay, and every act of cultural abandonment directly back to a theological failure to embrace stewardship and perseverance.
Proving that the spiritual and the temporal are inextricably linked.
That brings us to a provocative final thought for you to consider as you process this deep dive. If the source argues that the incarnation saved the true faith when it was nearing extinction under Roman rule, corrupted by internal forces like the Pharisees and external pressures like Hellenism, what institutions or parts of our society today, based on the material that we just covered, are now in an analogous position? What requires our active, laborious intervention right now in politics, culture, or faith itself to avoid final apostasy or destruction?
The powerful question that demands not contemplation alone, but a response rooted in action and perseverance.